US Secretary of State Antony Blinken is calling upon India to cooperate with Canada on the Hardeep Singh Nijjar killing, even as India releases evidence, pictures included, to show Nijjar's terrorist credentials. I'm Barkha Dutt, here with the Mojo story. Our focus through this week has continued on this big geopolitical story, a story that is now global with global ramifications. The picture you see on your screen is of Hardeep Singh Nijjar. From inflammatory speeches that have eulogized terrorists like Jarnail Singh Bhindranwale to his brandishing of automatic rifles, evidence is now being placed in the public domain by Indian officials, also talking about how the United States themselves placed Nijjar on a no-fly list in 2019. Intelligence reports suggest that Nijjar was planning attacks in India from his base in Canada. But this continues to be a parallel narrative, a narrative that has nothing in common with the Indian narrative in both the Western discourse and the Western media. American Secretary of State Antony Blinken is now calling upon India to cooperate with Canada. How do we read that statement? Alongside another statement that's actually come from the British Columbia Premier, saying that the evidence shown to him so far by Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau is open source information. In other words, information that he can find on the internet. He described the situation to be frustrating. This, as the National Investigation Agency, the NIA, swoops down on Nijjar and Gurpatwant Pannu's premises, linkages in all of Punjab, including in Chandigarh, sealing these premises. On the program today, we'll be looking at the geopolitical impact, what this might mean for the Indian diplomatic response. Let's introduce our panel of experts today. Welcoming to the program, up first is Ambassador Navdeep Suri, veteran diplomat, in fact, a Punjabi himself, with a long history, as it were, of understanding Punjab, its culture, and its roots. Also welcoming to the program today is Ambassador Prabhu Dayal, another veteran diplomat. It's always good to see you, sir. Welcome to the program. And also joining us is Ambassador Dilip Sinha. Welcome, as always, to the program. I want to get started with playing out that statement of Antony Blinken, probably the strongest statement yet to come from the United States, a statement that India may not necessarily like too much. Let's listen in.
We are deeply concerned about the allegations that Prime Minister Trudeau has raised. We have been consulting throughout very closely with our Canadian colleagues, and not just consulting, coordinating with them on this issue. And from our perspective, it is critical that the Canadian investigation proceed, and it would be important that India work with the Canadians on this investigation. We want to see accountability, and it's important that the investigation run its course and lead to that result. I'm not going to characterize or otherwise speak to diplomatic conversations that we've been engaged directly with the Indian government as well. And again, I think the most productive thing that can happen now is to see this investigation move forward, be completed, and we would hope that our Indian friends would cooperate with that investigation as well. More broadly, and you've heard me speak to this, we are extremely vigilant about any instances of alleged transnational repression. It's something we take very, very seriously. And I think it's important more broadly for the international system that any country that might consider engaging in such acts not do so. So it's something that we're also focused on in a much broader way.
Transnational repression. That's quite a phrase there. I want to start with Ambassador Sinha. What do you make of that statement? It's probably the sharpest statement to have come from the Americans, who thus far have been quite vague, quite generic. We now know that Trudeau perhaps had a plan to make this claim during or ahead of the G20. He was prevailed upon by his American counterparts not to sabotage, not to overshadow the G20. But the Americans sharpening their rhetoric to keep the Canadians comfortable, or do we read more into that statement? Ambassador Sinha, I'll start with you.
I think it is, as you said, to keep the Canadians comfortable. Canada, after all, is an ally and a very close neighbor of the United States. These two countries are part of the Five Eyes, where the intelligence agencies cooperate very closely with each other. But it's extremely odd that it's the US that is coming out with talking about transnational repression, whatever that means. It was the US that coined this term of a global war on terror, where the
Yeah.
US claimed the right to go and hit terrorists anywhere in the world, including Osama bin Laden hiding in a military hideout in Pakistan, killing people everywhere else. In fact, many other countries have exercised this right. India, of course, denies completely any link with this. But with Canada becoming a haven of terror, and if you want, I'll go into that about how evidence is now flowing out about Canada having become a base for terror. So, in that situation, the US has to go back and look at its own policy of how to react to terrorist bases in other countries.
Absolutely, there's deep hypocrisy. I mean, off the top of my head, apart from Osama bin Laden, there's Qasem Soleimani, who was taken out in Baghdad, an Iranian general taken out in Baghdad. There's the Baghdadi case itself during the Trump tenure. These examples are endless. But Ambassador Dayal, we have argued, as the Indian state has argued, we haven't done this. But the Indian public is saying, who is America to lecture us on transnational repression and how they're vigilant to it? Even so, despite all the sharp rhetoric, how seriously should we take Blinken's comments?
Well, Barkha, first of all, let me endorse what Ambassador Dilip Sena said and what you yourself said, that the Americans have indulged in a number of acts which, by their own definition, would amount to transnational repressions. I may even add to that list that on the basis of fabricated evidence, the Americans overthrew Saddam Hussein and launched an act of war against Iraq. And as I said, these were fabricated allegations because later on it was found that the very basis for which they went in to destroy the weapons of mass destruction, these weapons never existed then. So the Americans have been known for transnational repressions. Now, what Tony Blinken has said may damage the bilateral relationship with India because he is going entirely by what the Canadians are saying.
Right.
Justin Trudeau has repeatedly said that he has credible allegations of Indian involvement in the assassination of Nijjar. However, the Canadians have not given us a shred of proof. They have not given us an iota of evidence. So, how is anyone to believe what Justin Trudeau is saying? How is Tony Blinken believing that? He should have told the Canadians that if you are saying so with such authority, then please give the Indians the proof which you have with you. There is no proof. These are all baseless allegations. And while the relationship with Canada may have been damaged beyond description, the Americans should also be careful that they should not do things which will also damage the relationship. I would just like to add one thing, that Justin Trudeau says he has some evidence which he has obtained from the Five Eyes, and these Five Eyes are, of course, Canada, US, UK, Australia, and New Zealand. In at least 4 of these countries, Canada, US, UK, and Australia, the Khalistani extremists have been having a free hand. They have attacked Indian diplomatic premises, they have attacked Hindu temples, they are a law unto themselves and their activities have not been checked. So, as far as the intelligence input from the Five Eyes are concerned, I would take all these with a big pinch of salt.
And I want to pick up the last point that you made and take it to Ambassador Navdeep Suri. The fact that Blinken's remarks, Ambassador Sinha saw them as somewhat rhetorical, meant to keep the Canadians somewhat comfortable. Ambassador Dayal says they're not going to go down so well in Delhi. The bilateral relationship that seemed all rosy, Biden invited back to be the chief guest at the Republic Day parade, all of these things could be hit. Is that how you see it? The Western commentary in the media is also tone deaf. It describes Hardeep Nijjar seen here brandishing his automatic rifles as a preacher, as an activist, as a community leader. So there's a lot of ignorance and amnesia in the West. Do you agree with Ambassador Dayal that even the US-India relationship could now be hit after remarks of the kind we've heard from Blinken?
I think, Barkha, as important as whatever Blinken has said for the Canadians and for his own domestic audience, the more important element is what is happening in the conversations that are taking place between Antony Blinken and Dr. Jaishankar in New York. Over the last 24 hours, they have probably met several times. There was a meeting of the Quad foreign ministers yesterday. There was a meeting of the G4 foreign ministers with Brazil, Japan, and Germany. India is probably also using these meetings to put forth its own narrative on this set of events. So I think what's happening bilaterally, and you know, both Blinken and Dr. Jaishankar have always said we have a very candid, open relationship, and we are, in our relationship, we agree to disagree on certain points. So I think what's happening behind is going to be important. I think in the coming week that Dr. Jaishankar is in New York for the UNGA, this is going to be quite a test for both our resolve as a country and our diplomatic skills and ability. How do we navigate the situation, particularly if key Western countries try to link up and add to the pressure on India on this issue? And just one final thought, Barkha, you mentioned the dichotomy between the denial of the government and the chest thumping of a lot of people who are quite pleased that we've taken down a terrorist in their thinking. Maybe a better approach would be to do what the Israelis, who are kind of the role model in this area, do, which is neither confirm nor deny. Everybody applauds the Israelis, and you will never see them take responsibility, but you won't see them deny it either. That plausible deniability that they maintain, plus the fear that is struck in the hearts of those who get the message that their long arm can strike them wherever they are, perhaps might be a better approach to take.
So you're saying when India dismissed the allegation as absurd, India needn't have confirmed or denied it officially?
That's my thought. Yeah.
Interesting. Gives us a lot to talk about. Happy Mon, I'm very much hoping you can hear us. Just jump right in with your comment.
Right. Thank you, Barak. I think, may I say that I have a somewhat of a different theory in this regard. I mean, to very quickly put that across to you, the assassination and the developments thereafter have clearly put India in a sort of bad light. It takes the sort of glory away from the G20 in many ways. It sort of takes it away from us. And this also ensures that India is unable to make use of the sort of G20 success and the sort of, addressing of the concerns of the global South at the UN General Assembly that took place immediately after the G20. India is an aspirant for the UNSC membership. So in many ways, if you ask me, the assassination of Hardeep Singh Nijjar does not benefit India. Now, that leads me to consider an alternate theory. If this does not help India's national interest, India's standing in the international system, who does this benefit? So did somebody else actually do it and sort of knowing fully well that some people within the BJP might actually take credit and make the argument that, humne ghar mein ghuske mara hai, that kind of rhetoric. Knowing fully well that some people would take that credit, they actually did it at that point of time to ensure that India does not really shine at the UN General Assembly in the immediate aftermath of the G20. So I am sort of hesitant to accept the theory that India may have done it. I see, first of all, as many of you have pointed out, I see no theory. I see no evidence in that regard. And number two, anybody else could have done it. And at the end of it, it actually shows India in poor light. So why would we have done it?
Okay, hang on. What I'm fascinated by is that between Ambassador Navdeep and Happy Mon, we have two completely different narratives. Navdeep is saying, listen, don't own it, don't deny it, keep them guessing. That's what great powers do. Israel does it. The Americans release information when they want to. Hardeep says this puts us in a bad light. These are two completely contrasting narratives, and I want to take them back to Ambassador Sinha and Ambassador Dayal. But first, Trudeau isn't having a great time at home after this. He's actually getting trashed by his opponents, even some of his own allies and colleagues, other than Jagmeet Singh, who's a known sort of soft on Khalistan kind of politician, his ally. We have actually seen the British Columbia Premier today talk about the briefing he was given, and he called it open source information, the kind you can find from a Google search on the internet. Listen in.
In the public realm.
Okay,
the only briefings that I've been able to receive from CSIS are what are called open information briefings or open source briefings, which is information that's available to the public doing an internet search, which I find frustrating. And so I can be transparent about that information that I've received. In terms of the specific incident in Surrey, I was contacted by the Prime Minister. He briefed me about what he was going to say in the Parliament, which he then went on and said. He offered to me a briefing from CSIS, which of course I said yes, I would like that. We arranged it. We got a briefing from the director, which was, as I say, open source information, and then that was it. I expressed my frustration in the meeting with the CSIS director about our inability to get more concrete information about this kind of thing, and I have articulated that to the federal government. I understand there may need to be reform around the act that governs CSIS in order for them to be able to share this information. If that's what's required, let's make it happen. Because the only way that we're going to make traction on this is by the federal government trusting the provincial government with information and being able to act on it in our local communities.
Let's also remind our audience that the two unidentified assailants that shot Hardeep Singh Nijjar have not been caught. So even Trudeau himself has spoken about a credible allegation of a potential link. Those were his sort of precise words, Ambassador Sinha. Let's get into this very interesting dual narrative that we have before us. One that says India is embarrassed, the other that says, actually, this is a great message, don't deny it flat out right. Where do you weigh, Ambassador Dilip Sinha?
Well, I don't know what happened over there, so it's impossible to comment. What I can say is that I would agree with Jacob that if this goes out into the Indian electorate, Prime Minister Modi stands to benefit. There's no doubt about that. Whether he has done it or not, if evidence comes out that government agencies have been involved, then he would certainly benefit electorally here in India. On the other hand, if there is no evidence produced and Trudeau has egg on his face, even then Prime Minister Modi will benefit. So he wins both ways. But right. I would agree with the other point made by Blinken the other day that India should cooperate with Canada in this investigation. And there's one particular reason for it, and that is that Canada's record in dealing with terrorism based in Canada has been extremely poor. The other day, you had a person who was victim of the Air India tragedy. And he referred to this John Major Commission report. Yeah. I went through this report. This report is a severe indictment of the Canadian government of the investigation that took place. It was a cover-up. It wasn't even a sloppy inquiry. It was a cover-up of the investigation. And this contrasts with the investigation that took place of the bombing three years later in 1988 of the Lockerbie, of the Pan Am aircraft, in which case Libya had to pay compensation and was attacked eventually by the Europeans and the Americans and the Western countries. So India should not allow this Air India case to be buried, and India should insist that the inquiry that should take place should cover the whole whole gamut of terrorism based in Canada, so that all these facts come out. Now, in the case of the Libya bombing, arrests are still being made in the West of people involved in that bombing. Now, why should the Air India bombing be allowed to die? And there are enough credible reports coming out of Canada of the role of the gangs that are there in Canada and the gang warfare that takes place. And my last point on this is that whether it was there was any involvement of spy agencies from India or not, I don't think I would support that at all. I don't think spy agencies should get into this kind of actions, because eventually it backfires on the country itself. We have seen what's happened in the case of Pakistan. We have seen that happen in the case of the US way back in the 1950s when the CIA became extremely powerful and the FBI became very powerful. So I don't think we should allow spy agencies of any country to get involved in these extrajudicial killings. Thanks.
Thanks, sir. But I'm glad you brought up the Kanishka bombing, because the fact is that there's literally no commentary on it in at least the American media. Where I do have a column there, and when I was telling my editors at the Washington Post, this is what happened. I discovered how few people, not just there, but even in Canada today, are willing to acknowledge what happened. And you mentioned how we spoke to a victim. Before I come to Ambassador Prabhu Dayal, I want to play out just a very short clip of this victim. He was 17 years old when his entire family, his parents and his baby sister, were killed when Canada-based Khalistani terrorists put a bomb on Air India 182. And he basically said Trudeau has erased history. There is no conversation anymore about the kind of terror groups that have operated with impunity from Canada. I'll just play that clip and come back to the panel. Listen. Let's say you met Justin Trudeau somewhere after all this has happened. You're a living testimony to loss, to anger, to sorrow. And this man is literally in bed with the Khalistanis, political bed with the Khalistanis. And you had to say something to him. What would you say?
I'd say, you need to read history. And that's the reason, Barka, Terry told me, and I'm rewriting. I'd like to put down everything so that the world, at least it's recorded somewhere. Do you know there is no Indian book on this in the last 40 years? We're going to commemorate the 40th anniversary of the bombing in 25. There's not a single book that records every single fact, like I've told you, of who did what and how and when. And I'd like to tell Justin Trudeau, open up your files and look at your own confidential files. You will know who did what.
And he spoke in that conversation, Ambassador Dayal, about the bombs being tested on Vancouver Island, the Canadian intelligence knowing about it, evidence being destroyed, recordings being destroyed, only one person being convicted. He also doesn't serve his full sentence. This story is not out there. And today we are saying Canada is a safe haven for terrorists. But do you think we've been too polite about Canada? That question might be asked as diplomats, Ambassador Dayal.
Yes, I think we have been very soft where the Canadians are concerned. The Canadians have permitted the Khalistani extremists to act freely from their territory, whether it was the bombing of the Air India plane or a whole host of activities which these people carry out, including a recent attack on the Indian High Commission. Now, I would like to add that even in the United States, Sikh extremists calling for the creation of Khalistan are also permitted to act with total freedom. I served in New York. Gurwant Singh Pannu, who is the head of the so-called Sikhs for Justice, he acts freely from there. And anti-India speeches calling for the separation of Punjab and the creation of Khalistan are openly made in the Gurdwaras. We have taken it up repeatedly with the US authorities, as we have with the Canadian authorities. But what happens? Our consulate in San Francisco is attacked repeatedly. It happened twice in recent months. So both the United States and Canada are guilty where the abetment of Khalistani activities is concerned. Now, for Tony Blinken to say that India should cooperate is something like the pot calling the kettle black. Canada has not furnished a shred of evidence, as I said earlier. And instead of asking the Canadians to give some proof, he is saying that no, India should cooperate with Canada for pursuit of this matter. This is a very lopsided view. And I think this betrays something which is in the nature of bias, if I may say so. Now, my colleague, fellow panelist, Ambassador Hardeep Suri, very rightly pointed out that there are important things on the agenda that India should neither respond nor say anything. I think Ambassador Dilip Sharma said that there is a lot happening in New York between Jaishankar and Blinken. But believe me, This sort of a statement by Tony Blinken quelled the pitch. India
Right.
has done everything possible to create trust in the United States. We have slowly but steadily built a strategic partnership. But if the United States, at the level of the Secretary of State, says that India is not cooperating, and that is a sort of a veiled hint that we are involved in this assassination of Nijjar without giving any proof, then I'm afraid
Right.
then that spells very badly for our bilateral relationship.
So let me bring in Navdeep. Ambassador Suri, you said, be like the Israelis. But the point is, India has already denied this. Happy Mon has a completely alternative view. This isn't going to play out well for India. Ambassador Sinha is a little more sanguine that there is going to be no big hit necessarily to the US relationship. Ambassador Dayal is not. What's your take? Where does India go from here?
No, I think the relationship is strong and it will, it'll survive. We've built multiple levels of engagement with the US over the last few years. There's a very strong US interest involved in its own worldview with regard to China, etc., to nurture the relationship with India. But you will occasionally see any close relationship getting buffeted by strong currents, and this could be one incident. I personally, again, not having a crystal ball or anything, feel that it will ride out this bit of turbulence. What happens on this?
There's been a suggestion. I'm sorry I'm interrupting you. There's been a suggestion on earlier programs that the Americans may try to mediate a rapprochement while making these noises in public. Do you buy that?
So, because we are not privy to what's happening behind in the back channels, and I think whether it is the hard information, whether it is the intelligence, whether it is the technical intelligence or eavesdropping or anything else that people from various agencies might have picked up, these things are best shared between the agencies rather than being declared in Parliament as Trudeau has done. And I think that's what it has triggered this particular situation. If the same thing had been carried out at the level of agencies or foreign ministers quietly, perhaps the situation today might have been different. But saying it in Parliament without proof really leaves the matter hanging. I just want to clarify, Barkha, one point. What I said was that for quite a few people, Israel seems to be the role model. Mm-hmm. If it is, then this is what they do. Not to say that necessarily I advocate the Mossad kind of activities. I would be with Dilip that there are short-term gains and longer-term consequences for those on a country's reputation.
Sure. But I think Dilip is absolutely bang on that either way, it's a kind of win-win for the Modi government. But my question to Happy Mon, therefore, who's not so convinced, is that it's not necessarily a global win. Domestically, yes, not necessarily internationally. What do you think the downside might be, Happy Mon?
Barkha, look at it this way. I think this is a narrative that we are willingly falling into, and this narrative is going to harm our standing in the international system over time. Is anyone talking about G20 or the G20 success anymore? Is anyone talking about India being a responsible state in the international system that should be made a member of the UN Security Council? We are increasingly being referred to as an irresponsible country that has done X, Y in a different country, in a friendly country. That narrative is not suiting us. And more importantly,
but can I ask a question back on that? I mean, there's also a pushback against an old global order where one country will set the rules. That when the Americans do it, it's a war against terror. When somebody else do it, they've gone rogue. I don't know that Indians are willing to accept that kind of global policing any longer, Happy Mon.
I completely agree with you, and I don't think India has done it. As India has clearly said, we haven't done it, and Americans have no right to castigate us, especially when there is no evidence. That's my simple point. But who is benefiting out of creating a narrative of this kind? Who may have carried out
let's answer that. The answer is China.
Clearly. So, it could be China or anybody else, and we are having to take the responsibility for that. And some people are quick to take credit for it. It is probably going to be a tactical victory for the BJP, but it is certainly not in the interest of the national security establishment. This is certainly not in the interest of India standing in the international system. Somebody else is benefiting out. Why should we take the credit for it? And don't let the Americans sort of castigate and get away with us. There is no evidence. We haven't done it. Say it. That's the end of the deal. And focus on other things. Focus on climate change, global south, G20, UNGA. There are other things.
So you're saying change the conversation. You're saying change the conversation.
Absolutely. Absolutely. This is not a narrative we should fall into.
Very interesting. Let's get last comments and reactions to what Happy has argued. Ambassador Dayal, do you agree that it's time to change the conversation? I don't see the government doing that. I think you might be seeing things get a lot worse, much more aggressive from the Indian side before they get better.
Well, Barkha, we never started this conversation. So it's up to those people who started it in the first place to change the nature of the conversation, to change the subject of the conversation. We have been talking about global good. We have been talking about the interests of the global south. We have been saying that there is one world, one future, one family. But something else is now has overtaken this narrative which we were interested in, and that is finger pointing at us that we have carried out an assassination of a terrorist. Of course, there is no sympathy whatsoever for Nijjar because he was on the Interpol red corner alert and he had several cases, murder cases against him. The Canadians were not taking any action whatsoever. But nonetheless, we have denied it and the Americans should have taken that into account. The fact that they have made a statement which has a tinge of anti-India, pro-Canadian sort of flavor is not something that makes me happy, and I'm sure that we will put this across to the American future.
Ambassador Dilip Sinha, there's a kind of rhetorical narrative in Delhi right now. Canada is the new Pakistan because Canadian diplomats have been summoned more times in the last year than the Pakistanis. Suddenly there's talking, the language, the sentence that was used exactly for Pakistan, safe haven for terrorists, has been used for Canada. That is also an oversimplification, notwithstanding the Canadian patronage of these terror groups, because India has never gone to war with Canada. So I just want to caveat that. But you said you wanted to speak about that patronage. So go ahead. And respond to the comments you've heard thus far.
Well, I would say that India should actually demand an inquiry, a full inquiry into this incident. Not only this incident, last year there was a killing of Ripudaman Singh Malik, who apparently had changed his stand and was supporting India and therefore got killed. So this is a gang warfare taking place in Canada, which is an obvious result of a country giving patronage to terrorists. This happens in any country that gives patronage to terrorists. So as far as Canada is concerned, Canada is not a particularly important country in the world. I don't think we should worry too much about India-Canada relations. India-US relations, yes, they're extremely important. But I think that the US conducts its relations based upon larger global interests. The Khashoggi incident in Saudi Arabia is one example, where despite clear evidence, the US is now proposing a defense treaty with Saudi Arabia. So I think we should try and ensure that the India-US relations are protected. And this can be done by ensuring that the debate between India and Canada is focused on the terror issue. And India should be the one demanding a full inquiry into the matter so that the entire picture of the terrorist safe havens in Canada gets exposed to the public.
Yeah. Ambassador Suri, let me give you the last word. You clarified that you're not advocating for a Mossad-like model, but there's great public appetite for it. However, to maintain it in the global system, I think that's the point Happy One is making, whether you've done it or not. If you're perceived as that, it's a downside globally for India. Do you agree, or do you think actually this is India asserting, post the success of G20, the moon landing, the size of our market, the countervailing strategic force to China, this is India asserting a certain kind of muscle flexing that maybe wasn't possible earlier?
The chronology doesn't agree with it, Barkha. The killing of Nijjar happened in June, which is before Chandrayaan, before G20. It's Trudeau's comment 3.5 months after the killing.
No, I meant our response. Not how Nijjar got killed. In fact, I'm very curious, why has Trudeau taken 4 months to respond? But go ahead. Sorry, I just wanted to clarify that.
No, I agree. What I was trying to say is, firstly, the impact of this, we will have to deal with whatever Trudeau has done. when I said that it's going to be a test both of our resolve to maintain our position and of our diplomatic skills in how we navigate. And I think, between the foreign minister and others, we've got some fairly strong, capable individuals who can take that up. I just wanted to take on one point which Ambassador Lipsana had said, which is about Canada being not so important as a country. And that may be true in a geopolitical sense, but believe me, where I am sitting in Amritsar, it looms larger than life. The impact in Punjab is particularly severe, and the buzz around town, when I speak with my friends, there is zero sympathy for Nijjar. Some of my friends, again, are quite happy to say, good thing, good riddance to bad rubbish. But there is also that whole concern with all the families in Canada, the holiday season coming up, the wedding season coming up, what happens with visa refusals, what happens to those who are in the pipeline from here, who've paid the fees, 20 lakhs, 18 lakhs per student to get to a Canadian university. Long term, if we stop sending that many students to Canada, it's probably a good thing for Punjab. But short term, there's a real sense of crisis that has been unleashed upon people by a certain geopolitical thing which is happening.
I think that's a fair point. Obviously, Ambassador Sinha meant in the larger sort of geopolitical structure, but you're saying back home, it matters in Punjab. Nijjar doesn't matter, but Canada matters. The interconnectedness of the sort of world we live in matters. Thank you very much, gentlemen. We leave it there. My own feeling is that this isn't going away anytime soon. This is going to probably be ratcheted up before it can be dialed down. I hope I'm wrong. Let's see. Ambassador Sinha, Suri, Dayal, and Happy Mohan, thank you very much to the three ambassadors and to Happy Mohan Jacob and to our audience. Thank you for watching. See you soon. It's great to see you here. Thank you for watching our work. If you haven't subscribed yet, don't forget to click the bell icon and subscribe to Mojo Story and support independent, robust journalism.